Well, cool. I want to start us off with a question that I don't know if you've ever gotten before, but you've got game cameras, trail cams. I'm sure you've spent as much time in the wilderness as pretty much anybody, and so I'm dying to know how many aliens you've seen or caught on film, UFOs, something, Sasquatch.
I haven't caught any aliens,
No.
but I caught some folks keeping Austin weird, trying to figure out what I could get just camera trapping in my local green belt.
Really?
That was the strangest thing I've gotten on camera trap.
Do you care to explain, or is it better left unsaid?
That's exactly what you would imagine. They got full on, courtship and mating behavior right on the. Like there was a spot where there was a couple game trails that kind of converged down to this little pretty bend in the creek, and there was a nice little rock backdrop, and I set up my camera trap. I was trying to get some bobcats dialed in, and I put some of my trapping lure right on top of this nice stone. And anyways, that's where I captured the whole mating sequence of humans.
Lovely.
It's like, all right, time for me to pull my camera traps out of this urban environment.
Were the cameras visible?
Yeah, they were quite prominent and visible.
But they knew what they were doing.
No, they didn't.
You don't think
They didn't, because at the end of the courtship display, the female was appalled. She was like, "Oh my God, a camera!" And she kind of freaked out. And
They tried to break the camera or anything?
No, they just like ran away.
Holy cow.
But it wasn't cool, man. I felt like a creep. I was like, oh, I don't like this at all.
I was hoping you're gonna have some sort of crazy UFO story, but I feel like that's probably just as good.
I don't know. I'm just terrified I'm gonna see like that couple one day on the trail, just like go hide in the brush in humiliation.
What's your setup on a camera trap?
So we have three primary different types of camera traps that we use. We use cell cams.
Okay.
The spy points are the best ones that we've been able to figure out. So we use those for that kind of stuff. Like, hey, is that mountain lion over there on that kill site right now? Just because it's giving you, real-time data, and we're able to use those to kind of dictate where and how to deploy camera operators or go ourselves. And then we've had good luck with Brownings, the Browning trail cameras. I feel like their image quality is better than everybody else's. So we use those a lot for to scout. And then we have some higher end camera traps. We use the Canon R5 camera body in the Cognisus camera trap system, and that's what we use to get our high end imagery.
That's what I mainly used to shoot with when I was still at the build show, was an R5. So that's interesting. I was curious what camera you had. I mean, like on those HEB documentaries you did, I was wondering on so many of those shots. I'm like, how did he get this shot? I'm always probably a lot of camera traps and everything, like the ocelots and all of it. Yeah,
we're camera trap junkies.
Okay, I need to get invested into that. There's so much to do around here with those.
Man, it's the best because you never know what you're gonna find. It's like,
I mean, example A from earlier, you really never do.
But you just don't know what you're gonna open up the camera and see, and sometimes you'll get these gifts of ocelot kittens or just this behavior that's never been documented before. And it's like being in the woods. A lot of times, like whenever you're hunting or just nature watching or whatever, most of the time the animals know that you're there. A lot of times, or something's up or something's fishy. But a camera trap, the birds are quiet, everything is chill, and it kind of gives you this peek into their lives that you really can't get. The closest you can get it is hunting or nature photography. But even then, your goals are different. It's rare to actually sit down and just watch wild animals do their thing.
When we were hunting a few weeks ago, we went to southwest Colorado on a public unit that we could get on over-the-counter tags for elk. And that was my first time hunting elk or even
Did y'all go to
bow hunting.
Unit 65 or
We went to Unit 62.
62? Okay.
And that was like Montrose, west of Montrose. It kind of ran north-south. It was about 300,000 acres of
okay,
land, anywhere
cool.
from 8,000 to 10,000 feet-ish. And it seemed pretty perfect for elk. I mean, like we were saying earlier, there's signs absolutely everywhere, droppings that you could tell were, maybe a couple weeks old, but just no elk. But as we were hiking through, the birds I felt like were alerting. Is there truth to that? I mean, as we were walking through, I hear these songbirds coming in. I mean, I'm just curious if there's even an answer to that. But
Oh, do birds alert?
yeah, like when you come in and the birds, you can tell that they're chirping and see us. Are elk picking up on that? I mean, I was just shocked.
100%. Absolutely. That's nature's alarm system is the birds. And you'll see that a lot of times with our like ocelot or our mountain lion camera traps. I actually think it's a large reason why a lot of cats hunt at nighttime is because the birds in the daytime, they're just causing a racket and giving away their presence. And, if you're an ocelot and you're trying to sneak up on a rabbit, that rabbit has finally attuned to its environment and has been living there its entire life. And it knows what it means whenever a green jay starts, it's like, whoa, something's here, and pay attention.
And that's why I was just so fascinated as we were hiking through is like, is there too much hunting pressure? I mean, we saw probably at least 100, maybe 150 other hunters, even though it's, 300,000 acres, there was still what felt like a lot of pressure. And I was trying to figure out, I mean, are we just narrowly missing these elk, or did they, being as smart as they are, hey, they know it's bow season and they just went to the next mountain range where it's not a public unit? I mean, what is your feeling on that? I mean, do you think that they just, as the herds, will completely move out of certain units when they know that the season's coming in?
I don't know enough about that particular unit or anything at all about that unit or the elk there to have an educated guess. But, I feel like people don't give wildlife credit enough for how observant and smart they can be in some ways. And if you were a 20-year-old cow and for the last 19 years of your life, every time September 1st rolled around and 20 trucks pulled into the trailhead and you could hear them all, and then you could smell all the people, and all of them were ripping the same bugles and hoochie mamas. It's not like they forget about that from the year ago, and they know like, oh, there's these ding dongs again. I'm just gonna go hop over that drainage and go hide in that dark timber and just live there during the daylight hours for the next couple of weeks. Like, I think putting those things together is certainly within the realm of the intelligence of an elk or many ungulate species. And you get those lead cows that do that, and all the other cows are following them. And, all the bulls are just all rutted up. They're just going to follow the cows wherever they go.
Interesting. I mean, he's been hunting his whole life, and I'm just now kind of getting into it. And so I definitely felt like, a ding dong running through the woods, feeling like they knew I was there and they all ran away. Yeah, exactly. And we even stopped and as our way home outside of Durango, went to a couple of units. You couldn't hunt, but we were just curious. Like, we just want to see elk. Like, where can we just go drive? And we took this back road west of Durango. I mean, it was probably 30 miles one way we went forever back into the mountains and stopped with binoculars and still didn't see a single elk. And my theory is, they know and they all ran off to the places they know they're safe, but who knows?
So I'm really curious about elk population coming back in Texas, because before I found your page, I had no clue that they were making a comeback, and we're in the Panhandle, and I knew there were some out west, but I'm super curious about that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm all for it. I love elk, and my dad took me elk hunting when I was 16 in Lake City, Colorado, and I'm 35. So I've been hunting elk for half my life now, and every year I went every year for probably about 10 years in a row and guided for 4 or 5 years, and you're right. We had a camera trap up there in Amarillo, which is my stomping grounds where I was a kid, and saw a bull elk, like not 25 miles from where I grew up. And when I was growing up, to go see elk, you had to literally drive, hundreds of miles to go there. And that's just so cool that that's kind of happened in my lifetime, in less than a full year's less than a full elk's lifetime. But my knowledge of elk in Texas isn't really vast. What I do know is there's some evidence, but it's pretty scant on, robust elk populations that lived here pre-European colonization. There's not a large fossil record of elk throughout Texas like you find with, bison or white-tailed deer. But they're certainly there now, and they're doing extremely well now. In West Texas, I've seen them on 4 or 5 different mountain ranges, and I know they're on some others. And then they're popping up on the western part of the Texas Panhandle, kind of around, Hartley and that Canadian River corridor right in there. They're starting to see some elk, and then off the Caprock too, they'll see some every once in a while. But I think the big established herds that we have in Texas are certainly like Davis Mountains, Glass Mountains, and some of that like Sanderson to Marathon country out there. And nobody really knows how many of them there are. Not, at least I don't know anybody who has dared to give an estimate, other than that there's a lot in a lot of places. But whether that's 2,000 elk in Texas or 10,000 elk or 20,000 elk, I don't know. I'd be guessing.
Sorry, go ahead.
What are the hunting laws regarding? Is it a game animal? Is it private land only? Is it endangered in Texas? What are the rules?
So in Texas, my understanding is that they're not my understanding. In Texas, they're considered an exotic animal. And there's been an effort to create them as a game animal, same as like a mule deer and a white-tailed deer. And there's some confusion and some controversy surrounding that because there's not a solid body of evidence that shows that they were in Texas in abundance, pre-colonization. So like the question of, are they a native species? Yes, obviously they're a native species, but were they like commonplace in Texas? That's debatable, and it depends honestly who you ask. So there's some controversy there, and then there's also the question of, does changing the elk from an exotic to a game animal, is that a good thing for elk?
Because that would create a hunting season at that point if we had the numbers to support it.
That's correct. If it became a game animal, then it would become an animal that would be by default managed underneath the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department. And Texas Department of Wildlife tends to, with game animals, create seasons and quotas and bag limits. And then currently, as an exotic, their hunting is managed by the landowner, like a axis deer or an aoudad or whatever. And a lot of those landowners out in West Texas, they're stoked on the elk because people are willing to pay, $8,000 to $15,000 a head to go and hunt one because they taste great, because they're really cool to look at. And it's just awesome to have elk on your property. Yeah. So because a lot of that stuff is already privately owned and they kind of control the hunting access and game numbers anyways, I don't really know if turning it into a game animal would really change any of the management.
That makes sense.
And, if it did become a game animal, then it's going to be taking up resources from the department. It's going to be kind of another thing to have to do. So I have mixed feelings on it, as well as the folks at Texas Parks and Wildlife Department. That's one of those questions where, like, if it ain't broke, do you want to break it? Because the elk are coming back.
I feel like black bear is probably a very similar story. I know they're coming back. Are they? I don't know how Texas Parks and Wildlife views black bear, but it seems like they're in a similar story. Their population starting to come back. I think, from what I understanding, that's limited. There's probably a lot more black bear at this point than we do have elk. But what's kind of the latest with the black bear development?
Well, I think the black bear differs quite a bit from the elk because there is a large fossil record and large historical account of bears in Texas.
There is, okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
One of the famous houndsmen and lion hunters in American history is a fellow by the name of Ben Lilly, and his favorite elk or bear hunting tromping grounds was north of Conroe.
Oh, wow.
Really?
So there used to be a ton of bears throughout East Texas. They used to be in Central Texas. They probably spilled out underneath the Cap Rock, maybe even got up into the plains a little bit, probably along the Canadian River, certainly all up and down East Texas, and then out there in the mountains and stuff in West Texas as well. In fact, there was a grizzly bear that was killed in Texas in the Davis Mountains.
Wow.
Right around the turn of the 1800s to 1900s century, somewhere right in there. That's the only documented grizzly bear that was killed in Texas. And I think it's at the Smithsonian Museum, if my history remembers correctly. But the thing with bears, and I don't know if their extirpation was intentional, but Texas has such a strong agricultural background where, especially 30s, 40s, 50s, you had the sheep and mohair incentives where you just had a ton of sheep and goats, and predators and sheep and goats don't really mix as well as beef cattle and predators do. So there was a tremendous effort, really across the state to try to exterminate all predators for 100 years or so. And it was very successful. And I think the reason why it was so successful is compound 1080, which is a poison that you can mix with some meat, and you can drop it just out of your saddlebag as you're going through a pasture. You can drop it out of airplanes, and you can have like a systematic approach that can be done at a county level to eliminate predators.
So they poisoned them all.
They poisoned them, yeah.
Wow.
But I don't think the bear was necessarily an intentional thing to poison. I think it was primarily geared towards coyotes. But I don't have the data to prove this. Nobody has the data to disprove this either. But I would imagine that the coyote wars and the coyote poisoning wars was a significant reason why our ocelots were, went extinct throughout most of the state, as well as probably a nail in the coffin for bears in the early 1900s, as well as knocking back our mountain lions from most of the state as well. And, to its credit, Compound 1080 was indeed successful. I mean, it killed coyotes out of the central Texas, hill country and landscape for several decades. Thankfully, Compound 1080 became illegal to use. Well, a lot of it was because of the byproduct in the 1970s. And then I believe it was 1988 was the first documented record of a black bear coming back into Texas. And that was a person that was hiking in Big Bend National Park and photographed a mama with cubs.
Wow. What a cool photo that would have been. Just a moment. Yeah.
I saw one on Instagram in Uvalde this past week that was posted.
Was it the one crossing? Yeah, I saw that too.
It's like, holy cow. I've been hunting down there my whole life. I never thought there'd be a bear.
Yeah.
So, I mean, 2, 3, X number of years ago, whatever, 200-300 years, seeing black bear in the Barton Creek Greenbelt would have been very possible.
Oh, man. 300 years ago, down at Barton Creek, you could stumble into a jaguar.
Holy cow.
Or a black bear or a pack of 30 wolves feeding on a buffalo.
We had wolves this far south?
Hell yeah, we had wolves this far south.
I don't have a good understanding.
The last Mexican wolf killed in Texas was in 1972.
Holy cow.
That's not that long ago.
No, it's not. If you don't mind, could you give me a rundown of what used to be here? I mean, I'm born and raised in Austin. I never knew we had jaguars here. I mean, off the top of your head, I mean, Barton Creek 300 years ago, I mean, black bear, jaguars, wolves, coyotes. I mean, what else would we have had through here?
I mean, this Central Texas stuff, this was kind of the southern end of the Great Southern Plains bison herd. So I'd imagine that in the wintertime, you'd have, herds of bison kind of scattered in throughout. It was a lot more of a grassland, but all these river bottoms and all these, side tributaries and creeks, there's probably a lot more water back then. Or actually, there wasn't probably a lot more water. There was definitely a lot more water back then because we didn't have as many folks drawing water out of the wells. So there was a lot more surface water. There was a lot more creeks. There was a lot more water in the rivers. There was, herds of bison that were residential. There was also herds that were migratory. There were wolves that were following the bison, that were killing them. The plains wolf, which was, by all accounts from the early trappers and historians, larger than a lot of the wolves that are out there in the mountains. So they could have been, 120 to 160 pounds, like big old dogs. And then, along those thick river bottoms, we'd had ocelots, we'd had jaguars. The largest or the furthest north distribution of a jaguar that I'm aware of that's like verified was in Goldwaithe, which that's up there by Waco.
And those are all coming south to north. They're coming out of Mexico.
No, they used to live here.
Well, I'm saying, but I guess they used to live here. Yeah, but now, if there's any chance, it's all they'll all be Mexican. Or as of today, do they still have those animals in Mexico? I guess what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, and Tamaulipas, our southern neighbor, they got a lot of jaguars and lots of bears too. Yeah, I've gone and filmed their jaguars. They've got healthy population down there.
What is the conservation laws in Mexico like? I mean, are they doing much down there to protect any of these animals?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of Mexicans that just are very just like Texas. There's a lot of pride in their wildlife, and they seem to take a little bit more of like a local approach. I feel like Americans in general tend to rely on their governments to do conservation. I think Texas is a little bit different in that regards, where we have a very private landowner and pride in conservation of one's ranch or one's local area, maybe more so than other states, but certainly in Mexico, you have people that care deeply about their wildlife, and they're doing amazing stuff. They've got bison reintroductions. They've got pronghorn reintroductions. They've got phenomenal desert sheep. I mean, they're seeing a resurgence in jaguars and Sonora and Tamaulipas, Mexican wolves. Yeah, they've got they've got their successes and failures as well.
Those Mexican wolves, I saw a bunch of those in Arizona.
Oh, cool.
Black bear hunting this year in August.
Where at? White
Alpine.
Mountain? Or?
Alpine,
in
Arizona.
Alpine. No shit.
Just outside Alpine.
Wow. Well, were they in a meadow or?
Yes.
Cool.
But they were small. I thought they were coyotes at first. They were not near as big. So when you said Mexican wolves being here in Texas getting after bison, I mean, these things were small German shepherds. They were real small.
So that was a separate species. My understanding of the Mexican wolf, and there's lumpers and splitters whenever it comes to wildlife, but the lumpers try to say, that's Canis lupus, that's the same as all the wolves, but there's the splitters have a good case that the Mexican wolf was indeed genetically isolated from the other wolves because of like the Sonoran Desert and the Chihuahuan Desert and kind of blocking it off geographically. There was, maybe a little bit of genetic back and forth, but it was like a separate subspecies. And you're right, they're small.
Yeah.
I mean, we're like 70 pounds.
If that.
Yeah.
They weren't very big.
No, but my understanding is the ones that we had in Texas were larger.
Gotcha. Okay.
Or at least the plains wolf that we would have seen. I think the Mexican wolf would have come into that like Chihuahuan desert country out in West Texas.
It's wild how coyotes have come back in such strong numbers. I mean, they're in every city in America now, and they're everywhere.
They're where they used to never be. I mean, they're east of the Mississippi and stuff where there's no fossil record of them at all.
I didn't realize that. There's no fossil record of coyote east of the Mississippi.
Yeah, like coyotes, like like, pre-Columbus times was not in Alabama, and they are now. They've just kind of followed that human habitat.
That's interesting. So the ocelots, I had no idea until we were planning this that they were back in Texas, and I started researching it. That blew me away. Do we have an accurate account of how many?
Yeah, we have a pretty good understanding of what's going on with ocelots in Texas. Their brief history is, again, if we went back in time a couple hundred years, you likely would have found ocelots throughout East Texas, into Central Texas, primarily along the river corridors where you find like really thick forested areas. And then they probably spilled into Louisiana a little bit. And then there was even some fossil records and some hides that were taken up in like southern Arkansas.
Wow.
So that's kind of their historic range. And for reasons we just talked about earlier, the big anti-predator sentiment that swept throughout the state, 1950s. And we could arguably say it exists to this day. The poison, the trapping, the habitat loss. The ocelot's range was thought to have been gone. And then I think it was 1973 whenever the Endangered Species Act was created and the ocelot was listed. But we didn't even know if they were still there or not. And there was a young biologist in his early 20s by the name of Dr. Michael Tuez that was able to capture some in a live trap in the lower Rio Grande Valley in deep South Texas and proved like, hey, we have one at least.
Yeah.
And then he pretty much has dedicated his life to the understanding and conservation of ocelots in Texas and has done amazing things with that 50 years or so that he's been working on them. He just recently retired, but incredible legacy that he's been able to give. But right now we have 2 populations of ocelots in Texas, what they call the refuge population, which consists of around 20 to 25 cats found on Laguna Atascosa National Wildlife Refuge and a couple private ranches and some easements right around there. And then to the north of that, about 30 miles or so, is the ranch population of ocelots. And that's the larger of the 2 populations. And the nucleus of that is on the Ituria Ranch, and then on the East Foundation's El Sal's Ranch.
And that's the one you did the short film about? I
Correct.
believe? Okay.
Yeah. So we've done a feature, or we've done a 60-minute show for PBS Nature on the ocelots there, and then a variety of short films.
Wow.
American Ocelot. If you want to nerd out on ocelots, watch American Ocelot. It'll scratch your curiosity itch. And they're doing well. Like the habitat is pretty secure. All the landowners down there, they like them. Not all the landowners are part of the official censusing, but I don't see any really huge threats to the core nucleus of that population getting turned into pavement in the next couple of decades at least. But in my opinion, I don't think we should be satisfied with those 2 small populations. I think we should begin doing reintroductions into areas where they used to historically exist and likely still has potential habitat today. There's plenty of ocelots in Tamaulipas, Mexico. It's the same species. They're very genetically close to us. It's as easy or as difficult as going into Mexico, trapping them, bringing them up to suitable habitat in Texas, letting them go, and having more ocelots.
I'm all for it. Where do I sign up? Take my money.
Yeah, well, that's happening right now. I mean, there's been a lot of energy around ocelot relocation on, finding suitable habitat, finding landowners that are on board, getting all the permits and stuff taken care of. The Endangered Species Act, unfortunately, has some baggage attached to it. So one of the tools that a lot of the private landowners in Texas are using is called the Safe Harbor Agreement, which pretty much says, hey, federal government, I'm all game for having endangered species and engaging in conservation, but you can't tell me how to manage my ranch. So they get that, management paperwork out of the way, get everybody together, and start, reintroducing these cats. And we're seeing that happen right now. Like that is evolving. The permits are getting handed out. The money is there, the landowners are there, and we're going to see some really cool stuff with ocelots in the next 10 to 20 years.
That's amazing.
That's
Yeah,
awesome.
it's cool.
Yeah, that's very cool. I'm kind of curious, so my conservation interest I didn't know I had one until a few years ago, and it sparked one day. I had this Instagram account, Hike Austin, and that's really kind of what led to this passion for conservation I didn't know I have. And I'm barely scratched the surface. I'm only a couple years into it and trying to learn more and trying to do what I can to help. Forrest, we've been friends a long time, went on this elk hunting trip, and on the drive home, we started talking about the bison and what happened to those populations. And I feel like he had like an aha moment of like, oh, wow, maybe I should give a shit about all of this. I think I had my moment. I feel like Forrest had that. I think that happens to a lot of people where like something clicks with you and you're like, oh, wow, maybe I should care about this. Did you have a moment like that? I mean, what was it that led you into conservation and caring so much about all these different species? And why? I mean, was it just there from when you were a child, or is there a specific moment you can think back to?
I think though, I had a professor who passed away a couple of years ago by the name of Douglas Slack, who taught ecology at Texas A&M University. Mm-hmm. And he wasn't a particularly good professor in terms of like hammering a bunch of statistics and that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. But he was really good about talking about big picture type of things and kind of our role in ecosystems and kind of looking at stuff at a historical record. And just caring mm-hmm. about it and making it fun and making it cool. And I think taking his class, I just learned so much about like the natural mm-hmm. history of Texas. And I just find this stuff fascinating. I think most people do, mm-hmm. but it's really not taught in grade schools. And if you're not taught like as a kid and you get into it later, I feel like a lot of people that hunt kind of get it after a couple of years of hunting, mm-hmm. Where they kind of start to realize, okay, this isn't just about me killing this animal. Like this animal is cool just by itself. I want to create habitat for it. I want to, make sure that there's more of them. What can I do to help it out? Mm-hmm. But I don't think there was a single moment in my life where I had that aha moment. But I think certainly, Professor Douglas Slack left a big impression on me as a person.
Well, thank you, Professor Slack. That's
yeah,
great.
He was a good one.
For me, it was just a lack of education. Being exposed to it, it immediately piqued my interest. I love hunting. I love the outdoors, and then learning the history of the bison and then the American, elk being in Texas. It was really a domino effect. I was like, what have I not?
What else do we not know?
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel left out. Like,
that's right.
Mm-hmm. Have y'all gone to see the Caprock Canyon's herd of buffalo?
I haven't yet.
The Texas State herd. That's cool. It's worth going to see.
Yeah. I've seen your shots of them, but I haven't seen them in person yet. That's
worth going to see. I mean, just the fact that they exist is amazing because they were down to, I think, 5 or 7. And there was this lady named Molly Goodnight that was like, hey, I'm going to go save them things. And, they ended up being like the last of the Southern Plains bison herd. And
wow.
Now they're out there on our state parks. Mm-hmm. But you're right. Like, why aren't they at Paladura Canyon State Park? Mm-hmm. Why are they not on all of our state parks? Like, mm-hmm. why? And, like, if they need to cull the herd, I'll happily volunteer to come out and fill my freezer full of delicious bison meat. I think most people would. I mean,
absolutely.
That'd be super cool to have.
Well, that's what got our wheels turning because we spent, a week in the mountains, hiked 25, 30 miles, I don't know what, through the backcountry, which probably doesn't sound like a lot, but do that through the backcountry. That's a lot of miles, And so we come back, we're exhausted, struck out all week. And we start talking bison, and we're driving through West Texas of nothingness. I'm like, yeah, there used to be we'd be looking at thousands of bison right now potentially. And he was like, what the hell? You're telling me we could have, drove an hour from Austin and got a bison and done the same thing? I'm like, yeah. And so it was a fun conversation of just seeing his wheels turning with it all. And that's just how it happens. I feel like for a lot of people, the education just isn't there. For me, I got into landscape photography. So that was kind of the first click for me. I was like, okay, that's cool. I liked taking photos of waterfalls. So let me go find every waterfall in town, take a photo of it. And so that's what really started. Then my Instagram account, Hike Austin, kind of happened, and that took off on me. And I remember distinctly, I did a post. I was at maybe, 20, 30,000 followers and didn't really think too much about it, was just kind of posting whatever. and I did a post, and it had something like 3,000 or 4,000 people saved it, and another 3,000 or 4,000 people sent it to a friend, and it just stopped me in my tracks. And I was like, what am I doing here? Like, I'm sending potentially thousands of people to this park. Does the park even want me to do that? Can they support the people? Like, what am I doing here?
Surprise!
Yeah, and I'm like, and so I was like, oh shit! Like, I thought I was doing the right thing, but am I? And so I picked up the phone, called Austin Parks, called Texas Parks and Wildlife, and I made the rounds. Like, do you guys want me doing this? And all of them were like, well, absolutely. We survive off people coming to the parks. We want the revenue. We'd love for you to. And so that just really clicked for me. And I stopped posting like little neighborhood green belts that don't need, thousands of people. But the larger places, absolutely, we want the people going. So that helped me a lot to kind of understand. And then I ended up getting connected with West Cave. And that's my wheels started turning from there with everything. But I'm just trying to do what I can for those aha moments, if someone wants to learn about conservation, or if they have any sort of interest, try and do my little part if I can to pique their interest in it. Because I think, as we said, it's a domino effect. Once one falls, you start to realize all these other things and get curious about other animals and so on and so forth.
Yeah, and kind of as a wildlife historian, which I have to be in order to make a film or to be able to, tell their story. We do a lot of deep dives on different conservation issues, and you would assume that most of them have a well-founded organization and a bunch of really smart and competent people that all came together and realized, hey, this is a great idea. Let's all do it combined and have this well-organized force. And that's just not how a lot of these great ideas happen. It's typically a handful of just really just dogged personalities that put their mind to getting something done. And if you look back at a lot of the really great conservation success stories, you can typically trace it back to a handful of people who probably at the time were like, man, I don't know if we can actually pull this off. We may just bit off more than we can chew.
Too funny.
Yeah. Sometimes you just hit the full send button and see what happens, and sometimes things work out.
Mm-hmm. Very thankful for all the folks before us that did that, all gas, no brakes on these issues. It's what's needed, I think you have to spearhead them and get after it. I'm curious, I'm sure you've had a lot of people ask you, your favorite shot or your favorite animal, which I am curious about, but what's the greatest shot you missed? Because as a photographer, I know that feeling when you've missed that shot and it just aches and it pulls at you. And so I know you have to have some of those. I mean, what are some of the greatest shots you missed?
Oh man, I don't even know where to start. I think some of the most painful shots are of probably lions and jaguars.
Out of focus, or just missed them, or
or the battery ran out, or there was false triggers, and we were down in Sonora, Mexico, filming borderland jaguars last year and checking camera traps every 6 weeks. Austin Alvarado was our point person there. And there was a couple times where, for no reason other than just the camera trap gods were against us, the batteries would die on Thursday. And then on Friday, you would have, a big jaguar walk through and we just missed the shot.
Oh, no.
Then we'd show up on Sunday only to realize it was the one day. So those are painful, those really rare occurrences. But I've been fortunate, knock on wood, that the times when I've gotten, an epic whitetail fight or a mountain lion hunting or some of the stuff that maybe once in a lifetime, I haven't screwed it up too bad yet. Not enough to where we weren't able to salvage it in the edit room and make a story.
How'd you get that shot? I think it's from Caprock of the bison. They're on a ridge. Was that a drone that you were flying kind of horizontal with them? There was a whole group running?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I saw that shot just in my head. When I think of you, I think of that shot for some reason. I don't know why.
That's the nicest thing somebody said about me in a long time.
I don't know. I like that one a whole lot. It was a good shot. You have so many of those that are just. I sit there. I'm like, how? Like, I mean, this is just so cool, and the underwater stuff that you've gotten.
Dude, wait till you see our mountain lion sequence that we shot last year.
Oh man,
we figured out how to film an uncollared mama for like 45 days. She like went hunting for us. It was freaking nuts.
I'm excited. When is that releasing? What's
25?
Okay,
2025. Yeah.
Well, I'll be sitting here
so
on pins and needles.
Stationary cameras, or were we all tracking her?
No, we were there. Yeah, I was like, figure out where she's at, go up there, find her tracks, and then go on the other ridge line and post up, and then get opposite of her, 600-800 yards away, and
Gotcha.
And film her hunt.
Oh wow,
It was fun.
Awesome.
It was cold.
Those cats are hard to get close to, not be seen first.
Yeah, they can be really frustrating. Like the best mountain lion filming, uncollared mountain lion filming I've ever had. It's like you hike in glass all day, and you're lucky. You're like doing really great if you see them once every like 3 to 5 days.
How often do y'all find them stalking you?
I haven't had any lions like look at me weird. Sometimes they'll kind of, because they're kind of like sheep, where if you're below them and they look down and they see you, they don't really care that much. They can just they just sit up there and just look at you. That's only whenever you're like at their elevation to the side or above them that they kind of get kind of spooky and run off. But I haven't had a lion, come and like snarl at me or anything.
Have you had any close calls with bear or anything?
No, I had a grizzly bear come in one time when I was chopping up an elk, which is understandable. I was quartering an elk, and he came in about 10 yards away, and I didn't see him. He was kind of in some jack pines. He stood up and did that
Jeez.
and communicated to me that I needed to leave that elk carcass, which I did.
He said, "That's not my supper."
I was like, all right. Thank you, Mr. Bear. I do believe I'm going to grab my horses and move on out of here.
Did you shoot the elk with a bow?
No, that's when I was guiding up in
Says you have a rifle to.
Yeah, I had a rifle with me, but I don't want to shoot grizzly bear. It's an endangered species, not that many of them. And
10 yards is pretty close.
yeah, but he just stood up and just did like his whole dominance thing. And as soon as I backed away, he just kind of stood his ground.
He was just waiting for his dinner. He knew what was going on.
Yeah. Yeah. But that was he definitely got my heart pumping there.
Where was that? That had to be up pretty far
Wyoming.
north. Yeah, Wyoming.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah,
How
there
long
was a lot of bears there though. Like we were running into grizzlies, if not daily, like every couple of days.
How long did you guide for?
I did 4 seasons, maybe 5 seasons. We did the horse pack. We packed in the southeast corner of Yellowstone, right outside the park boundary, to a famous camp called Gates Camp Lucky, from the Cody side, so up the Shoshone, over Deer Creek Pass, and down into the thoroughfare, and it was awesome.
All
it was
elk?
super wild.
Guiding for
Elk
elk?
and mule deer, yeah.
Nice.
There's better elk hunting out there, but I don't think there's a better adventure in the world than packing in on there on horses.
That sounds amazing.
Grizzly bears and hear wolves most nights. It was freaking awesome.
You have lived quite an unbelievable life. I'm curious, how'd you get into the filmmaking aspect of it?
I decided to make a film. So 2010, after my freshman year, I didn't know if college was for me, so I dropped out and got a couple buddies, and we adopted some horses and did the Continental Divide Trail, New Mexico, Colorado, Wyoming, Montana, and that was awesome. Took about 4.5 months and did that, and that was my first real exposure to public lands. And I was 21 at the time, and just blew my mind that there was so much public land in the West that you could quite literally ride a horse from border to border and not, like, you could still do that and be in, big wild country the whole time. And it was just something I didn't think a lot of people knew about. And then, simultaneously we did it on some Bureau of Land Management wild horses. So you've got all these horses that need homes. There's like 50,000 of them in holding facilities that aren't getting adopted.
Wow.
And they did a great job for us. So decided to do that trip again, but to make a film out of it. And that movie turned into the film Unbranded, which came out in 2015. And that was my first kind of exposure to film. And it did a lot of good. It got a lot of horses adopted, brought a lot of attention to the issues surrounding wild horse management and mismanagement, and kind of allowed me to see that there's a lot of power in making movies, and I've kind of stuck with that ever since.
Absolutely. What was the thought process? I mean, Fin and Fur Film, from my understanding, are you guys a nonprofit?
No, it's a LLC.
Okay. I don't know why I was thinking it was, how does that work? Filmmaking, let alone, is hard enough to let it go turn into a nonprofit. Okay, that makes more sense. Is there any?
Now, it's a for-profit company. I don't know if we've ever turned a profit, but.
And so, Deep in the Heart, from my understanding, was that that really made some waves from what I could tell. I mean, it seems like, Matthew McConaughey hopping on that. Then you posted something recently with Casey Musgraves. It feels like conservation, I'd say in the last 3 years, and I could be wrong. I mean, I'm just kind of coming into it, but is really kind of getting a spotlight shined on. I mean, I think you're a huge portion of that, but I mean, what are you seeing? Do you see a changing tide in conservation more than you have in maybe the last 5 to 10 years? I mean, does it seem like it's getting better or more in the public eye?
Man, I don't know the answer to that. I feel like I live in my little bubble, and it's hard for me to see out of it. But one of the things that just terrifies me is I see people that I've kind of always looked up to asking me for advice now. And I'm like, man, you don't realize how confused and lost I am as a person to think that I have the answers. And I'm not particularly brilliant or well-funded or athletic or good-looking or whatever. And, like, I love my team, but I don't think they are either. And it's just one of those things where I wish there was more people, to be really honest, helping, do more conservation filmmaking or communication and making it cool. There's a lot of opportunity, I think, and I think that the audience for it is there. I mean, we proved that with Deep in the Heart. Like,
absolutely,
people loved it, and theaters were so reluctant to even screen it. They're like, I don't know, who's gonna come and watch a nature movie? And I mean, we had some theaters that were where Deep in the Heart was outperforming Top Gun on some of those weekends, which is bonkers.
That's
it's
amazing.
Crazy.
Congratulations, though. That's
really
amazing.
Cool. But it's a sign that Texans in particular, like, we really care about our Texas wildlife, and by no means do I think I have a saturated market at all. I would love for there to be more conservation storytellers and filmmakers in this state. And, maybe we stumbled into this model of, local feature films that take a couple years to make, and then they kind of have some organizations supported, through it, and it kind of draws people together to celebrate this kind of stuff. Like, I would love to see more of that happen, because there's many other states and many other parts of the country that, you could do a Deep in the Heart type of film on,
absolutely,
the Rocky Mountains or the Great Plains or all sorts of stuff. So no, I feel like, yes, it's cool, but for me, it's always been cool. But I do think it's great to see, folks like McConaughey and Casey Musgraves get behind it, and put their name into it and say, hey, it's badass. Let's do this.
All right. Are there any fun McConaughey stories? I mean, I'm sure. How did you snag him? Is there any fun behind the scenes stories to tell there?
To be honest, it was a lot easier to get him on board than I had anticipated because I've never worked with anything like Hollywood movie at all. And I just looked up who his agent was and called him on the phone and said, hey, my name's Ben Masters, and I'm making this movie on Texas wildlife. And Matthew loves Texas, and he loves wildlife, and we'd like for him to narrate it. Here's, some sample footage. And I sent him over, I think, the ocelot cut and the bison cut. Maybe it was the deer fight. It was about like 20, 30 minutes worth of footage. I noticed the next day the agent called me back and was like, hey, man, Matthew loves this. What are your terms?
Wow.
I was like, oh, what? Well, that's a good question. What are my terms? Let me see here. I just like grab some numbers out of the air and picked a date on the calendar. And he was like, okay, this is agreeable. We'll see you then.
That's awesome.
Holy cow, that easy.
Yeah.
Too funny.
Yeah.
Wow.
But that was really cool. And he did a great job, too, on the narration.
It was amazing, yeah.
Yeah, he crushed it.
Well, I think something that you're doing for conservation that's just so impactful is, I think historically when you think conservation, you think tree hugger, you get all the negative terms that come with it and people that are, super granola-y, hemp pants hugging a tree. I mean, I think conservation now has a much different image than previously. I feel like it kind of had that baggage with it. But I feel like you're doing a wonderful job. I mean, like, everybody cares about conservation. It's not just people that are super, tree hugging type folks. It's businessmen. It matters to everybody. And I think you're doing a really good job of kind of like opening that up. And I mean, that was part of the conversation I had with Forrest was like, I'm diving deep into conservation. And I think for him, that was his kind of mindset of it until more recently, just like, oh, wow, like this is much wider audience and a wider scale here than I think a lot of people realize initially. I think there's just some baggage that comes with it. And I think you're doing a phenomenal job of kind of cleaning that up.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. I think that's just kind of the roots that I have is, coming from an ag family and coming from a wildlife family. And, I kind of have our own little Texas wildlife filmmaking niche, which we've created, but even like within like the larger industry of the natural history filmmaking productions, there's that it's hard, and I have a hard time sometimes explaining, like, if you've never grown up around hunters or if you've never grown up around like people that ranch and like raise livestock, like yeah, they want to hunt deer, but like they also want there to be a lot of deer. And if you ranch, like you want to have a lot of water and a lot of grass, like it's in your own best interest. So, there's a lot more things in common than we have in difference. And I feel like, I hope that there's more and more folks that want to get engaged and are authentic about getting engaged and not just greenwashing. And, if you look at a lot of the Texas folks that are funding a lot of the work, and maybe it's just because our state is such a oil and gas and energy economy, but you see tremendous investment in, native seed research and soil sciences coming out of the oil and gas industry in Texas.
Wow.
And, a lot of it's not for like environmental type of like if you went to California, you wouldn't call it like environmental type of methodology of conservation, but it's what are the best practices to, conserve grassland for bobwhite quail. And if you conserve grassland for bobwhite quail, you just conserved it for all of your other, ground nesting songbirds and a host of other species, and you've got good soil health and a lot of other things. So I just feel like we just do things different here in Texas, and that's all right. It's what makes us special.
Yeah.
Maybe we do it better in some ways than other places. I don't know.
Definitely.
What do you think the future of our water situation looks like?
Man, that's a tough one there. I think that whenever it comes to big species in Texas, like elk and, deer and even ocelots and mountain lions and bears and that kind of stuff, you're able to really rally around that kind of stuff and for the most part celebrate it. Most people want there to be the big charismatic megafauna, and you can get people bought in on that. Whenever it comes to water, that one's really hard because we have a lot of endangered species in Texas that I would not be surprised if they go extinct in our lifetimes because of the water scarcity that I believe is coming down. So whenever we talk about like conservation, there's like the conservation 1.0 of, your big charismatic stuff that you could go out and see. But whenever we talk about like biodiversity and extinction and species loss, I think Texas is in for a really rough next century. And I think that especially our aquatic species, our minnows that require, or our shiners that require open rivers that don't have a bunch of dams. I wouldn't be surprised if they're going to continue to go downhill. I think some of our like spring obligate pupfishes and, really critically endangered stuff that only exists in a couple spots. If you have those springs go dry, if we have a drought like what we had in the 50s, I could see them, just completely losing their habitat. Mm-hmm. And then a big one that I think is going to be ugly is our mussels. We're losing our healthy rivers, and the indicator species of a healthy river is a mussel, and all of our mussels are disappearing across the state. Oh, wow. So my outlook on Texas rivers and Texas water situation is pretty dire. I think that more and more people, we're just going to continue to pump more and more out of the aquifer. We have all these different groundwater conservation districts. Like, you look at the one in Hays County. It's like they have one, but
they have no teeth.
They don't have any teeth.
They can't do anything. They're bound. It's the whole situation there is so frustrating.
It's like you can set these rules, and if somebody breaks it, and then you're like, all right, well, we're going to give you a fine, and they're like, well, we're not going to pay it, but we'll take you to court. And by the way, we have $1.5 million to fight you legally. What are those NGOs gonna do? Mm-hmm. Put up like a $1.5 million legal fight, mm-hmm. and there's 1,000 of those happening all over the place. And I don't know what's gonna happen with water in Texas other than hope for a couple good hurricanes every few years.
We need a good flood. Lake Travis needs it. It's low.
Yeah.
It's controversial being in the pool business and knowing the water shortage we have here and everyone moving here. It's really frustrating. Lots of builders build pools kind of like a production build instead of building them right where they're really not watertight. And so we come behind a lot of leaky pools to fix them.
I think it's easy to point your finger at stuff like pools, but like the evaporation loss from swimming pools, I would imagine it's
very minor. It's landscaping that really takes the boot.
Mm-hmm. Landscaping, and then ag, and a big one is evaporation loss off of reservoirs.
Yep, lakes that we dammed up.
Do we need this many reservoirs? Mm-hmm. That's a very valid question to be asking, because if your evaporation loss is so high on super shallow reservoirs with a huge surface area, does it make sense to have that reservoir, or would it make more sense to have that be a river bottom?
Mm-hmm. Water is scares me more than about anything. Conservation issues that we're dealing with and the future coming. I mean, just seeing Roy Creek and places like that, that's Jacob's Well, Blue Hole in Wimberley. I mean, the list goes on. It's pretty terrifying. How are you doing on time? I could sit here and ask you questions literally till dark, but
I've got a 5:00 dinner I've got to go to. I'll turn my phone off. I don't know what time it is.
We are at about 3:50.
Oh yeah.
Keep chatting a little bit longer.
Cool. Sure. Coffee's got me going.
There we go. Also, I could sit here and do this all day. I just don't want to hold you up. So.
Yeah, no, I'm good.
So hunting, do you rifle hunt, bow hunt? Both?
I bow hunted for many years. I was able to get 2 nice 6-point bulls, and
nice.
I had an experience 3 years ago where I missed, and I hated it so much. I don't know why I missed either. It was a good shot, and it just bothered me so much because if you miss, you could also wound. And I just hate the idea of wounding an animal. So I've kind of just been hunting with my rifle for the past couple of years because typically if you got a good rest and they're broadside, you can deliver a pretty swift death.
Yeah, you have to practice a lot to be efficient, to have a good clean kill with a bow and wait for the right shot opportunity. That can be difficult if you're not sitting over water. If you're spotting and stalking, they most of the time know you're coming and will jump the string. What rifle are you shooting?
I've got a 7mm 284.
Nice.
Rim mag.
Awesome.
Browning X-Bolt.
There you go.
There you go.
Yeah, does the trick.
Been the go-to for a while?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not like a particular marksman. I'm good out to about 200 yards or so. But, you hunt with a rifle, but you can still hunt like you've got a bow in hand. And I do love that proximity aspect of it. But to be honest, I still love to hunt like an elusive buck or to find like the old man in the woods. But I've kind of gotten to where I primarily just hunt for meat. But that itch that gets scratched of like that chasing the quarry for me is filmmaking and trying to chase stuff with the camera.
That's awesome.
It does the same, hits those same receptors for me, I guess.
I haven't put the bow down and picked the camera up yet, but I sure love bow hunting.
I do too. It's cool because you know how the difference between bow hunting and rifle hunting is whenever you're bow hunting, you enter into that zone where you're like within 60 yards and you have to stay in it sometimes for a long time until you get that shot opportunity and they enter into your shooting lane. And then, you have to be calm and composed. With the camera, you have to enter into that and you have to stay in it for a long time, sometimes like hours. And for me, that just like a rush of like, all right, there's that mountain lion. I'm going to go get 80 yards away and I'm going to sit there all day. And then you just have to like stay in that zone for a long time. I'm not going to lie, I'm totally addicted to it.
You ever try to call them in? Cats?
I'm saying
I haven't had any luck. Yeah, I've tried actually multiple times. And I've actually like spotted a cat and then tried to call it in. And didn't have any luck getting it to close the gap. I know some people can or have.
I've called in a couple of bobcats. They're so much smarter than fox and coyote. It's wild. I've never called in a mountain lion.
Yeah. Well, I've tried with bobcats and had nominal success.
Are you using a mouth call or using a Fox Pro electric call of some
Most
sort?
of the time we use a Fox Pro and we'll set it up about 30 yards ahead of us with like a nice viewing lane, and then that way we have like a good filming opportunity right there.
Y'all pay attention to the wind every time you're going after cats?
Not with cats, I don't.
Really?
No. With dogs, for sure. Coyotes, I think, are the hardest thing to camera trap or film. But
Coyotes, really?
Oh,
Wow.
man, they're hard.
Why is that? Because, the cats are so much harder to get to come into a call. Coyotes aren't that hard.
Well, I feel like with coyotes, my experience with calling them is they tend to come in pretty fast, like 3 to 10 minutes. It's like, whoa, there they are. And then they come in, they look, and they're like, something's up, and bam, they're gone.
You got to shoot quick.
And a lot of times with bobcats, what I found is you got to sit there, and sometimes it can take like an hour.
Oh, yeah.
And then you just look over, and you're like, oh,
They'll circle
what's
you,
that
too.
bobcat doing? And but I haven't had an issue with wind with them coming in. In fact, we've had them come in, see the decoy, see the call, and then see us and had them like walk up to the blind and like come in and check us out. Like, are you a quail in there? Like, can I eat you?
What's going on here?
So I thought I thought their nose was top of the food chain as well, but man, black bear, I've had tough luck getting winded by them. They've got the best nose in the game.
Yeah.
They can smell you from 1,000 yards away.
Yeah.
That reminded me on the film you did for HEB about black bear, and you have the tracking, net collars you put on. While I was watching that, I was thinking, it's probably a stupid question, but eventually they're going to outgrow that. I mean, those things look like they're pretty tight. So are you just tracking them when the time comes? You'll go find exactly where they are and have to get them back in? Or I mean, how does that
so
work?
that's not me collaring those bears.
Okay.
That's like a trained wildlife biologist that captures the bears and gives it, you know, a very specific dose of anesthesia to knock it down responsibly. And that's not me.
And I saw there was like a third-party company. I forgot, Borderlands
Research.
So they were the ones that they hired.
Do a lot of the research.
They tranquilize it first?
Yeah, they drink it first. But they put on the collars, and most collars that you get nowadays, they have a button where you can automatically release it.
Oh, interesting.
So like it collects data for that year or whatever that interval of time is that you want it to collect data for. And then at the end of that, they have the ability to either automatically pop off or remotely pop off. And there's just a little latch that comes undone and it just drops
interesting.
off.
I saw on the video.
You know that feels good.
Oh yeah, that's what I was saying. I was like, I just know that's got to get sweaty and uncomfortable for him, but it's in the name of research. But yeah, I just remember there's a scene on there when he was putting it on, and I thought I saw what looked like a little bolt and a nut he was tightening down. I was like, man, that's quite the process. But that's so cool to know that they can just remotely pop off or after a certain amount of time. Yeah, it's very cool.
Yeah, you know, get your data. That way they don't have to wear that jewelry for the rest of their lives. And I think it is uncomfortable for them at first, but I think they get used to it really fast. And like I've been around animals that have collars or had collars on them, and there's not like, you know,
Signs of wear or anything.
yeah, it's not like they have abscesses or like really slows them down that much.
What are your thoughts with wind turbines in West Texas and migratory birds getting wrecked?
I think wind turbines have their place. I really do. I hate to see those landscapes turn into red blinking lights and, you know, ugly windmills, but I think that we should be looking at as many alternative energy sources as we can. The issue that I have with wind turbines in Texas isn't so much should we have them or not. It's, you know, I think that there's some going up in places that don't make any sense to have wind turbines. I think there's like no zoning or regulatory oversight at all. And you've got these epic landscapes like, you know, the Devil's River or the Pecos River or...
Are they putting them down there around the Devils?
Yeah.
Wow.
And you've got these like really last wild places that are left in Texas. And yeah, that's a foreign investment deal too. It's not even a Texas thing. And you're seeing these wind turbines going up. And
who's funding them? Who's the foreign entity that's funding all this?
Originally, it was a Chinese firm that had the wind turbines on the Devil's River, and then they sold that lease, and now it's a Spanish wind farm that's hoping to put them in. And but for me, it's like, you know, you look at some of that stuff up there on the high plains where it's already turned into, you know, row crop and agriculture. Like there's already infrastructure, there's roads, there's, you know, people hungry for the jobs. People want them there. And that, to me, that makes a lot more sense to put them there first before we start putting them in.
Yeah, the Devil's River.
Yeah, the Devil's River. The ones that bother the hell out of me are the ones right there along our Texas coastal flyway. It's like that is the most important migratory flyway in North America for songbirds, for waterfowl, for butterflies, for bats. It is literally the worst place that you could put a wind turbine. And they're just popping up left and right. And a lot of them don't do any type of mortality data at all. And there's not like a regulatory body in Texas that says like, okay, well, you can't put it there if it's going to chop up 1,000, you know, ducks a year or 5 whooping cranes or this or that. Like we don't have data on what the mortality is. Wow. And that to me just is wrong. It's like, you know, you have these energy companies. And like, yes, it's alternative energy, but we should be able to know what the degree of mortality is. And we don't. We don't know.
Well, see, I thought this whole time you hear wind turbines, I feel like wind turbines killing birds has gotten pretty mainstream, air quotes, you know, but the bats, I had no idea until your short film for HEB is fascinating to me. And then you mentioned a second ago, butterflies. I mean, are all of these bats, butterflies, birds, obviously, these are all being affected by the wind turbines?
Yeah, I mean, the wind turbines, they're going so fast.
Just chops them up as they come
It doesn't
through.
even have to hit them. Just like that vortex can kill them.
Wow.
Just the proximity of it itself. Especially there along the coast, Like take for example, I don't know, have you guys ever gone and seen like the big rafts of redhead ducks? We have like pretty much the world's population of redhead ducks that goes down on winters on Lower Laguna Madre. And those redhead ducks, every day they have to go drink fresh water because they're out there eating the seagrass. So they fly inland, and they fly right at the height of the wind turbines. And they go in there to those inland freshwater lakes, they drink the water, and they fly out. So you get a day where, you know, there's a bunch of clouds, and you get that big old string of ducks that goes right into the wind turbines. We don't know how many are being killed. There's no, like the landowners and the energy farms and the leases have an agreement where like there is no data to be collected.
Wow.
So there's nobody studying it. So like maybe it's not a big deal, but maybe it is. Like we don't know. But
We don't have the
most
data to know, yeah.
certainly it is for bats. And full credit to the energy company that was featured in our Batsies film. It was that company that was hiring Sarah Fritz to go out and study bat mortality
interesting.
on that wind turbine. But that's an anomaly within the industry. Like a lot of wind turbine companies, they don't have that, you know, in-house scientists. They don't have that in-house transparency, or they don't have that desire to know.
They don't want to know, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, what if they were chopping up a bunch of hoary bats and causing the species to go extinct? That's bad for business. So I do think that, you know, with wind energy, with all alternative energy, we need to recognize that there is, you know, severe environmental costs to those, the same as there is to oil and gas. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't do them, and we shouldn't like try to wean ourselves off of hydrocarbons, but we shouldn't just, you know, rush headlong in there and turn our blinders on to the fact that these things are causing environmental damage. And then also, why the hell are there all those red freaking blinking lights? That is the stupidest thing in the world. Who flies their airplane 300 feet above the ground through a wind farm at nighttime? Nobody. Nobody does that. So why are there the red lights? That's the craziest thing.
Driving through there at night
stupidest
is
thing.
just insane. When you see them all, I mean, it's
I think it's criminal. I think they're ugly as hell. I understand the energy perspective of it, but then what it's done to the dove, from what I've heard, in North and West Texas, just slaughtered dove.
Yeah, I don't have any data on dove. I don't know.
I had a friend, it was T. Boone Pickens' old property. They had Hunters for the Hungry out there every beginning of September picking up thousands of dove a day because they just had everywhere dead every day.
Just going back and forth between like all those ag fields and their water holes.
Apparently they had a bunch of turbines put up, and every year, you know, August and September, it's just a bloodbath for the dove.
Interesting. I didn't know that. But that's the kind of stuff I would love for there to be more data on you know, wind turbine mortality. And even with the Batsies film that we did, like they're still just trying to figure it out. Like they're like, we honestly don't know what the degree of mortality is with the bats. But we have quite a few endangered bat species in Texas, and that's what they're trying to do, is figure out like, all right, what is the degree of mortality, and then you know, what is the potential solutions to try to reduce that. And then that'll help us weigh out the cost-benefit analysis of like, you know, is it worth it putting it here? Can we put it over there?
at least have a conversation about it and have data to support the decision.
Should we put them offshore 100 miles out where they're not in any flyways, or at least not any big flyways, and
have all the red lights you want out there.
Yeah.
Yeah. What was it like working with HEB? I mean, I've always been a big supporter of HEB. I think that they're a company that really puts their money where their mouth is. You know, at West Cave, they're a massive funder out there. So I've always had a soft spot for them. But what was that process like? I mean, them reaching out to you, I'm sure that was a wild, just like, holy cow. Do you do a lot of work for companies like that? I'm just kind of curious on that process.
Yeah, HEB reached out to us, and my initial concern was like, are y'all trying to like greenwash, or what's your objectives here? And they said, good question. They're not. as you would expect. HEB is as good internally and ethically as their butter tortillas are for your belly. But yeah, I was really impressed by them. I've done brand work before, and I felt like I've been kind of used to greenwash before in the past. And with HEB, I never got that feeling. They're doing a big effort to try to source a lot of their produce and a lot of their products, like from Texans, from producers that are, doing a good job. Like the East Foundation, you've got this big cattle ranch. They're producing beef cattle for consumption, but they're also, providing habitat for ocelots, and that's one of their suppliers. So they're like actively seeking out good partners that care. And they came out with that line of Texas foods called Our Texas, Our Future Foods, of made in Texas, Texas producers to the standards that HEB puts their stamp of approval on. And if HEB puts their stamp of approval on it, I'll buy it and eat it and feel good about it. But yeah, I got to see kind of behind the lens of that company and got to meet with a lot of their people that talked about like what are their like internal ethical standards of where do they buy produce and how can they reduce, waste, and how can they support, recycling. And like if you go and you look at their bags, you don't see buy more stuff from HEB. You see, here's how to recycle me. And if you look at their plastic water bottles and you compare it to like a Dasani water bottle, they have like recycle me. Here's how to do it. And, they try to invest in plastics that don't, biodegrade over centuries, but instead of do it over decades. And they just seem like they were the company that I wanted them to be once I kind of got to peel back the curtain a little bit. And that was really cool to see that. HEB for president 2024.
I agree.
Have you had any companies come to you? I know you said you've had a few that you felt like they were greenwashing you a bit. I mean, have you had anybody that you've just flat out said no to? Obviously, you don't have to share names unless you want to, obviously, but don't. But have you had anybody that's like, no, I won't work for you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm in that fortunate position now where I've got enough work to where I'm not just begging for work. Where if I don't want to work for somebody because I think that they could, their source of revenue isn't one that I want to take cash from, I'll tell them no. And yeah, I've done that before. Who
are some of your other clients? I mean, what's your typical? I'm kind of fascinated like how you operate the business side of it too. I mean, who are your main type of clients coming in? Are you going out and getting any private equity yourself? I mean, deep in the heart, how did the finance of that work? I mean, did you have a budget, go out and raise the capital? I mean, kind of break down the business aspect if you don't mind.
Yeah, so we kind of have, and then I've got to run after this, but we kind of have two different business models. One is like for clients. So HEB was a client, and they came to us and said, can you go make wildlife movies? And we're like, absolutely, let's go. And obviously it was something that aligned with our interests, so it was an even easier yes. And the other method is our like passion projects or our features. And for that kind of stuff, like with Deep in the Heart, it was an idea that we had. It's not like we had a client that we decided to make it for. Well, for that, we went and met with a bunch of different foundations, met with a bunch of different individuals, and I think there was probably 20 foundations and 200 individuals that produced enough revenue to or contributed enough money for us to produce the film. And then we were still short of our total budget, substantial amount, like $350,000 that we risked out of like personal cash to get to the finish line. Wow. And then we've been able to recoup that through revenue produced by the film. Okay. So it's like, it's split. Like some of it is, educational and nature foundations, and then some of it is projected revenue off the film that offsets the expenses. So we're still trying to figure it out, but unfortunately, deep in the heart, wasn't like profitable enough to be able to pay for all of the expenses.
Okay.
And that's just the realities of the media world that we live in. Is it's hard times.
Yeah.
We're, having to rely on, conservation philanthropy in order to get us over that hump to where we can then use like free markets to pay for the rest. Hopefully we'll get better at it with time.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I really appreciate what you're doing for conservation. One last thought for you, and I will let you go. I know there's a big vote coming up next month to increase some funding in Texas for parks. Do you want to give us a little quick plug on that?
Yeah, definitely. Hats off to Luke Metzger. I don't know if you know Luke, but he's...
I know a home builder named Luke Metzger. Is that... No, he's not a home builder, is he?
No,
okay,
no.
I know a different Luke. I know a Luke Metzger home builder. It's
no,
funny.
Luke is with this organization called Environment Texas.
That's right.
I guess maybe you could call him a lobbyist. I don't know. He just kind of have a freewheeling spirit. But last year they had a $32 billion surplus in funding. And he was like, man, we should like make a $1 billion fund for state parks. Which is ridiculous. Who proposes, let's go raise $1 billion? Like, that's insane. That's a stupid amount of money. It's crazy. Like, no. And so he ends up going up to Dallas and meets with like a big heavyweight in the Republican Party who's also really conservation minded. And it's like, hey, can you help us make this cool? Do you think this would fly politically? And they were like, hell yeah, let's do it. Go find like a Democrat co-signer. So he went and got some Democrat co-signer and got like the Republicans and Democrats in the same room. And they're like, yeah, everybody loves state parks. Let's do that. That's a great idea. So this like off the wall ridiculousness that he just pulled out of thin air all of a sudden turned into reality. And they put together this constitutional amendment. It's going to be a proposition that people can vote on. It's Prop 14 on November 7th. And vote yes on Prop 14 to dedicate $1 billion to the creation of new Texas state parks.
That's amazing. Like you said at the
crazy.
Very beginning of the podcast, normally in these big conservation efforts, there's normally a small group of people that had the audacity to go spearhead it. So thank you to Luke for, full sending that idea.
Yeah. Why not like 10 million or like 100 million? He's like, $1 billion.
Hell yeah.
I love
it.
I guess that's to any advice to anybody listening about conservation. I guess I'm going to walk out of here thinking all gas, no brake. That's what it takes.
Yeah. And also the thing is like with that, $1 billion of new state park funds. I mean, we'd be, possibly tens of thousands of acres, if not hundreds of thousands of acres of new public lands in Texas. What other state's doing that?
That would be awesome.
There's no other state doing that. Like, let's freaking go.
Yeah, that's
I
amazing.
mean, that's cool. It's happening in our state. And, I just look at our politics and they're so divisive and they're so so ugly sometimes. And this is like the one thing that we can all agree on is Texas is badass. We should conserve it.
Hell yeah.
Amen.
Oh,
Thank you, Ben, for coming on. We really appreciate it. Thank you for everything you're doing for conservation. A couple guys, recently getting into it. You're a shining example of, what can be done with conservation. And you're just chasing your passion, and it's resulted in all this other amazing work that's being done. So thank you.
I appreciate it. We'll keep it up and let me know how I can help you guys.
Yeah, we appreciate your time.
Cool.